So Humpty-Dumpty said, "When I use a word, it means just what I choose it to mean." And that reminds me of the time that my son Kevin was 3 years old, and we had gone to see a musical. And we were walking down the aisle, and he said, "There's our seats." And he was pointing, except he wasn't using the pointer finger. And I said, "Kevin, yes, you're right. Those are our seats, but this is the pointer finger. That other finger is considered a bit rude." "No, Mom, you're wrong," he said. "This," holding it up, "is the pointer finger. This is the rude finger." I said, "Well, Kevin," I said, "most of the people in the world wouldn't agree with you." "Well," he said, "they're wrong." So I just want to discuss with you today a few words, and the ways that words change their meaning, and they change their meaning in part because of the way we understand them and the way we bring new meaning to them. The few words are hello, decide, and perspective. Hello. Hello goes back to the hunting cry, tally-ho, but it wasn't used as a greeting until centuries later. The first recorded instance of hello being used as a greeting is from 1833 in a book by Davy Crockett. About 10 years later, Charles Dickens visited America, and when he came back, he wrote A Christmas Carol. And in the story, Scrooge, who greets no one until after he visits with the three ghosts, Scrooge wakes up and joyously greets a street urchin with hello. Did going to America influence Charles Dickens? Hello. Now, Alexander Graham Bell, as most of us are aware, invented the telephone, but he did not invent hello as a way to answer when the phone rings. Bell thought that when people answered the phone, they should say, "Ahoy!" I wonder, does anyone answer the phone that way? Yeah, one in the back. We're Unitarian Universalists. There's always one in the back. And we probably all be saying ahoy today, except that Thomas Edison won the contract to set up telephone exchanges all around the world, and he instructed the operators who placed every call to say hello when they answered. And at the 1906 meeting of the Edison telephone operators, each one of them wore a name tag saying, "Hello, my name is," just like people do today. And now, decide. Language is like a coral reef. It develops through layers and layers, new building on the old. And the very oldest metaphors don't feel like metaphors because they're so ordinary. They may even be invisible. One example is the word decide. Doesn't sound like a metaphor, does it? It comes from the Latin word meaning literally cut off. And strangely enough, in many languages, including languages that don't have as much Latin influence as English, the word for decide also has an origin meaning cut off. In German, the word for decide, entscheiden, comes from scheiden, which means to separate. In ancient Greek, diario is used to mean decide, but its literal meaning is cut in two. In Indonesian, memutuskan, for decide, comes from a root word meaning severed. Swahili, kata shari, which means decide, has the literal meaning to cut matter. The word for decide isn't simply derived from cut, but in Kenya's Nilo-Saharan language, in biblical Hebrew and in Chinese, decide and cut are exactly the same word. And why not? Like King Solomon deciding who was the mother of the child, he said, cut the baby in half as a way to provoke the real mother to become visible. A decision cuts off discussion, concludes debate, shuts the door on deliberation. When we cut to the chase and end the endless filibuster, we vote, and so we decide. And notice we're deciding between this and that, A and B. See how binary decision is, even in its earliest origins. Why does it matter that a metaphor built into a word is foundational to human languages and to our thought processes? All of our abstract ideas, all philosophy and theology developed through this incredibly rich and textured process of the evolution of language. As a species, whatever language we speak, humans have taken a vocabulary of words for simple physical objects, words like tree or dog, and words for simple physical processes, words like cut and go, and have exported them into new contexts to express ideas that are not physical and in many cases not simple at all, like decide. Our understanding of complex issues and our perception of another person's meaning is rooted deeply in the metaphors underlying the very words we use. So when we talk about decision making, we may not think about cutting things up, although it's amazing how often someone mentions King Solomon and the baby. Yet the link between physical cutting and non-physical deciding is there, unstated and yet powerful. It may lead us to think that decisions are yes, no, on, off, binary, 0 or 1. Our whole way of thinking about decisions may be influenced by that underlying metaphor. And we may say that there are two sides to an issue. Are there? Or is it just that our language compels us to this binary point of view? We may say, many people do, that gender is binary. Is it? Or is it just that when we think about deciding what gender someone it is, it's so easy to think that there must be only two choices? Binary thinking at the core of the word decide may bias us to see only polar opposites and fail to see all of the perspectives in between. Perspective, the third of the few words for today. Perspective is at the core of many of our public policy debates. The word perspective emerged in the late 1300s from the idea, I love this, of looking through a telescope to see something that is very far away. Think Galileo and his telescope. Its roots are in the Latin perspicere, from per meaning through, and spicere meaning to look at. But a few hundred years later, during the 1590s, the word perspective took on a different meaning. It was used in art to describe how artists can draw objects to give them appearance of being far away or having depth that isn't really in existence on a two-dimensional canvas. And it's easy to see how the idea of using a telescope to see a faraway object would translate into the art of drawing an object so that it looks far away. Then there's a third meaning of perspective as we use the word today. It's a single point of view in a world with many points of view. In Galileo's time, perspective definitely did not have that meaning. His point of view about the Earth not being at the center of the universe was rejected very harshly. The original meaning of perspective referred specifically to the idea of looking at something far away through lenses separated by a long tube. Imagine using a telescope. That single perspective is truly singular. It's a view that shuts out peripheral vision and confines the observation to a single point. Tunnel vision. And the artist, looking at a distant object, uses perspective to share how that object looks from the artist's point of view. From the artist's point of view. Each one of us sees and understands events as if we are peering through our own unique telescope, limited in our field of view to the interpretation urged upon all of us by our life experience, family, friends, culture, education, travel, and language itself. Perspective, the way we see, is influenced by the way we listen to, or by the way that we don't listen, by the way we hear or not, by the way we seek to understand or not. When my son was 3, he wasn't listening to input that disagreed with his point of view about which finger was the pointing finger. But differing perspectives are at the heart of the most painful public debates of our time. So remember Stanley Fish. Some readers, the determinate point of view, that words have a meaning, that there is one perspective. People who think like that think that anyone who disagrees with their interpretation, with their perspective, simply chooses not to see the truth and perversely substitutes their own meaning. And it's because, this happens because people see from their own perspective. Whole communities that share a perspective see a policy issue in the same way. Think about people who believe that the earth is flat. Now, a long time ago, that was a widely shared perspective. The community of human beings as a whole shared that perspective. But as time went on, the understanding that the earth was not flat has expanded the community of people who share that perspective. And yet there are still people who believe that the earth is flat. And here's something very important that Stanley Fish, this great troublemaker, also says. Disagreements cannot be resolved by reference to the facts, because the facts emerge in the context of some point of view. Now, that seems weird to someone like me who believes, say, in science. But it's easy to see this process at work in our world today. Just think about climate change. Now, okay, I believe in the processes of science and the learning that science offers us. And so I think that the Earth's climate is changing and that the carbon dioxide human beings add to the atmosphere is a major contributing factor. I believe in science. That's my perspective. So maybe I might be misled into thinking that because there's scientific evidence of the human contribution to climate change, public policy can and should be determined by referring people who disagree with me to the facts. But if differing points of view lead to different understandings of the facts, then people who don't accept science in the way that I do will refer me to a different set of facts. They'll explain the way that my science is wrong. Stanley Fish promises that disagreements are not settled by the facts, but are the means by which the facts are settled. We see that with the flat earth controversy. The disagreement eventually rose to the point where enough people changed their perspective that now it's not unanimous, because perspective depends on point of view, but most people do understand that the world isn't flat. And maybe one day there will be that shared understanding about climate change. Let's hope for it to come sooner rather than later. But the challenge that we face in urging our views and our values on the world is to recognize that we're not in a debate about facts. We're in a debate about perspective, about another point of view. We don't change minds by referring people to the facts. We change minds by shifting people's perspective, even if it's just by a little bit. Perspective. Charles Dickens traveled to America and came back with a new meaning for the word hello. And Scrooge spent an illuminating evening with 3 ghosts, and his perspective changed entirely. The first ghost reminded him of happy times in his youth. The second ghost showed him a happy family and the little boy who might not have long to live. The third ghost showed him a grave. He wept. He wept. And when he woke up after that long night, his perspective had changed. He charged out into the morning, determined to make that little boy's life better. He began greeting people right and left, bringing to England a new meaning of the word hello. What meaning do we bring to the world? If we cherish our values, we want to promote them. But our task isn't to argue with people or to inundate them with information they're not likely to accept as factual. Our task is to turn them just a little so that they can see the world from a different perspective, to tell them our stories and let them tell us theirs, to find a way to share both laughter and tears. Our task is to welcome them into our presence. Our task is to touch their hearts.